Conference. I'm Colette Segan-Beagley. I'm the Assistant Director at the Resource Center. Let me start by mentioning to RAs that if you haven't gotten your ticket, see Carrie in the back. I'd like to welcome our student organizations out and about and our brand new graduate queers and allies. Please stop by their tables to learn more about these great organizations. And I'd also like to welcome allies and advocates who have a table at the back of the room too. Please stop by and see Gary and get more information about that group. Each month, our ongoing LGBT conference features a different topic as it intersects with issues impacting LGBT communities. Next month, our ongoing LGBT conference will be LGBT and gender, and it will feature Donna Rose, who is a national transgender activist. It will be right here in this room on 11/11, November 11th at 4 p.m., so we hope you'll be able to join us. This month, our conference is focused on LGBT and race. Our co-sponsors for this event is Gay the New Black. I thought I mixed it up there. Include the Office of Multicultural Affairs, the Women's Center, Inclusion and Equity Division, and Human Resources, and we thank our co-sponsors. The November 2008 cover of The Advocate magazine read, "Gay is the New Black, the last great civil rights struggle." I remember when I received this in the mail and looked at the cover, I remember exactly where I was standing. I stopped and I thought, how could they do this? What were they thinking? Did they think about how many people this would impact? The following month's magazine featured a powerful letter to the editor from our speaker, Billy Curtis, which addressed the complexity of these issues and was entitled, "Gay is Not the New Black." In his response, Billy stated, "Racism and homophobia take the same emotional toll, but the painful experience of each is like describing the difference between bleeding to death from 1,000 paper cuts versus a gunshot wound. Which would you prefer? Seeing the cover of your magazine was like receiving all those paper cuts and the gunshot wound all at once." We're so pleased to feature Billy Curtis, the director of the Gender Equity Resource Center, as well as Assistant Dean of Students at the University of California, Berkeley, my hometown. Go Bears. While at Cal, Billy secured health insurance for transgender students, a huge feat. Created the Cal Ally program, where participants address intersecting social justice issues. Was awarded chancellor's funding for initiatives in leadership. He also co-authored Transgender Issues on College Campuses and is the recipient of UC Berkeley's Chancellor's Outstanding Staff Award. In this article, author Michael Joseph Gross states, "Our lives are merely fragments of the endless story of the human struggle for dignity." Billy's response to the article challenged us to, quote, "a more complicated and authentic dialogue across our differences." We're so honored to have him join us for this important national conversation. Please help me welcome Billy Curtis.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm not going to use this mic very much. In fact, I want to switch immediately to take it off mute. There we go. I like to move around and stalk the room. So you've heard a little bit about me, and this is a very front-focused room right now. But let's find out who's here. I want you to do a little exercise. You thought you were coming just to a keynote lecture. Wrong. So I want you to turn, even if you know the person, to turn to the person next to you, introduce yourself, and tell them why you're here. What is one thing you hope to take away from this? You have a few minutes. Not a few minutes, a few seconds. Go. If you haven't already done so, please make sure to let the other person speak. Okay, that's not the only exercise. You're going to do that again. Turn around or in front of you, find another person and say, what is it about this particular topic, whether it be, you see it as race, gender, sexuality, or the title itself, Is Gay the New Black? What are the emotions? So I asked you what you think, what do you hope to take away? What are the emotions that come up for you? A little bit more risky. What emotions come up? Okay, let's come back to the front of the room. You've had some time to chit-chat with one another. The reason I did that is because often we come to lectures that are entitled diversity, or it's about equity, inclusion, multiculturalism, etc. And particularly when the room is set up like this, it creates this space of, oh, what is he going to tell us that we can take away, etc. And there's no sense of who's in the room, how others are feeling, a sense of community, etc. So what I want is about 3 volunteers, not to tell me what your neighbor said, or the person you met, but what you said on any of those questions. Can I have the first volunteer? Yes, could you stand up? What's your name?
Carol. Well, for me, with the whole Is Gay the New Black, since I am a black person, it kind of does touch home with me, because pretty much it's like the government just created a law saying that law-abiding citizens are not allowed to have a specific part of their pursuit of happiness. And I'm just sitting there like, wait a second, what? You know, it's kind of like how saying, it's pretty much equating to me saying like on the same lines of interracial marriage, like you two law-abiding citizens can't marry each other just because of the fact that you have different skin color. It's the same with, oh, you two law-abiding citizens can't get married because of the fact that you're the same sex.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Hi. I'm Mary Dykstra. And I guess I came here to become more educated, because just within the last year have I actually become more aware of the lack of rights. And I had no idea. I thought I knew, but I didn't know. And I'm learning. And it's so great to have this opportunity.
Thank you. One more person. Excellent.
Hi, when I first looked, my name is Melanie, work in Human Resources. When I first looked at that particular article, it made me, emotion was pissed. One of the reasons that I came here today was to figure out the underlying messages, or what is the deeper meaning, because when you first look at an article and you look at the title, it's like, okay, this particular title, it is what it is, so I need to get more information.
Excellent. We're all going to be responsible for getting information to one another and sharing more. I have a presentation for you. I'll be doing quite a bit of talking for a little bit, have some video clips even to break it up a bit, and even more exercises in the middle of that. But then there'll be some question, answer, and comment period. And so that's how we're going to spend the day. I want to say thank you so much to Colette and the other sponsors in the LGBT Center, Multicultural, I was about to say Student Affairs. That's incorrect. Is that correct? Okay. And the Women's Center. Incidentally, the University of California, Berkeley still doesn't have a well put together yet multicultural center. We had a student strike for that a little over 10 years ago, and it's still struggling to be put together and find the funding. The goal is to have it fully up and running. We were trying to figure out space. It doesn't even have its own space yet. So many folks have this idea of Berkeley, the great liberal, progressive place. It must be so far ahead. I got there 10 years ago and went to the first organizing meeting and was completely shocked that that wasn't there. So I applaud you for what I see downstairs in terms of how folks are working in unity and to work in collaboration. And as I get to the end of my remarks, that's where I have some action points that I think what needs to happen on college campuses and what needs to happen more broadly. And you've already shown, at least just by structure, in terms of your reporting lines and the physical location and a collaboration like this, that you are well on the way and you well think about this, that we really need to address intersectionality. So thank you so much for having me come here. The other thing is that the goal of this workshop is that I will impart knowledge, but I am by no means an expert. By no means. I'm an expert on my life. I'm an expert that I came out as a gay black man that was born in the Caribbean. So I was born in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I went to school in Massachusetts and then went to grad school in the San Francisco Bay Area. I've been working in higher education for about 20 years, mostly in student affairs, and now work for the last 10 years as the director of the Gender Equity Center, and hired at UC Berkeley as the first, then the coordinator of LGBT resources. We have a new division of equity and inclusion, and we are really struggling at Berkeley as well, and I think nationally folks are struggling with these questions. So how do we look at multicultural education more broadly? How do we look at the intersections? What is the interplay of identities? And of course, the cover of The Advocate completely jumped into it, whether they intentionally did it or maybe they intentionally thought, great, this is going to start some great conversation. They probably did it to sell some magazines, right? So how did I come to discussing this? I spend a lot of my time really focused on gender theory and gender identity, transgender issues, because that was the hot topic, the hot thing to do at Berkeley, and particularly in my job. I do look at race issues and the intersection, obviously, as a person of color and a person of African descent. But I don't get too much into writing about it. I was kind of almost like taking a mental break, and I'm really into the gender identity and gender theory. And in the Gender Equity Resource Center where I work, which handles lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender issues, women's issues, which is the former Women's Resource Center, sexual violence, sexual assault, domestic violence, rape, and hate crimes, we have an area in the center where folks can hang out, fall asleep on the couches, do their homework, etc. And of course, we have magazines. I want you to know The Advocate is not one of my favorite magazines. It just isn't critical enough around its discourse. But I knew I needed to have, and I knew my interns and the students coming there needed to have some magazines so that at least they can hang out. So we had great debate, as only students at Berkeley can do, about which magazines should be bought by the Gender Equity Resource Center. And that's not, I'm sure, in any center, that's not an easy thing. You don't just check off. And as a director, you're not stupid enough to just go and buy the magazines and think it's going to work. So we didn't have too much problems coming up with Bust, and it's, pardon my language, it's a magazine called Bitch, and that's what the feminists wanted, and we're going to have that there. But what were the gay magazines? What was going to be the magazine that represented the gay voice. And we couldn't really find one that worked, and we finally said, you know, we'll give in, we'll have the advocate. It covers it, it'll at least give us an idea of what's being said out there. And it's somewhat entertaining, and it's very easy to read. We'd gotten the subscription we'd been into the subscription we've gotten into some that's a 3-year subscription. It had been 6 months when this shows up. And it's on the table in the central location. The printer in my office was broken, so I had to walk into the intern area, and this magazine was sitting on the table closest to the printers. Usually the magazines, the students, we have to put stickers on them. Please don't take them home. We know you want to read them on the bus, etc. And they usually disappear, or they usually sit further into the center. But this one sat on a table that I had to pass every day for what seemed like a week, and it never moved. No student picked it up, no staff member. It was exactly where it was placed by the student assistant who had taken it out of the mail. No one touched it, face up. Very unusual. Of course, every time I walked by it, I had this gross feeling. It was a Friday afternoon. I was the last one in the center. I grabbed the magazine. All right, I'm going home to read this. And I read it on the train. And I got home, opened the door, barely closed it, sat down at my computer, and with no editing, wrote my letter, which I'll read to you later. But where the anger came from was that over the course of the debate around same-sex marriage, I had always made it clear to my colleagues that I had some issues with our fight for same-sex marriage and the way it was being framed. And that I personally have some issues with how we frame marriage around couplehood and how we place rights that are civil rights for humans within this context, within this structure that you have to be a couple. So whether you're heterosexual or same sex, I had a problem with that, and I always thought, no, this should be decoupled, and we need to have a broader conversation. I remember saying that with a group of faculty at Cal, also known as UC Berkeley, and they were like, that's never going to happen. So I realized that the movement was really rushing forward. And I fell silent. I knew that I had a different voice, but I chose not to have it. During the course of the Prop 8 elections, I realized that the ads really were not as diverse as they needed to be, and there was a young man, a person in my office whose partner, and they were married actually, his husband, was part of the Prop 8 campaign, and I said, you know, I've noticed that you don't have a lot of people of color, particularly African Americans, in your ads. And I just want to point out that Obama's running, and so a lot of black people are going to turn out. So how are you speaking particularly to folks who look like me? How are you getting us on board with this? And he literally looked at me and said, oh, people have had discussions about that, but they've made some clear decisions about where the money is, and that's as much money as they can spend. They can't really make different types of ads. About a few weeks later, it turns out they did come up with an ad, which I will show you, which was supposed to speak to the black community, and you will see how it fails miserably. And so the night of the election, I was at a party with some friends, and I went, we all had to dress up as our favorite situation that happened in the election, and I went as lipstick on a pig. That was fun. And so we were having some fun with that, and as it was clear that Obama was going to win, and I was trying to be really happy, and it was mostly straight people, mostly white, a few people of color. And I got on the phone with my cousin, who's in South Carolina, and who's also an immigrant married to an American. And she was explaining a different experience because South Carolina had gone red. And that how her husband, she was concerned because her husband had just gone to bed and didn't want to see what the outcome was because he still wasn't convinced and he had had enough disappointment. So here we were, immigrants, having this experience around what I was watching what was happening with what looked like a whole bunch of white straight people, and she was experiencing what was going on with some African Americans in the South and how folks were feeling. And there was elation in the room, and I finally said, I need to get off. I want to hear the his acceptance speech. And now it was time to turn to the California elections. And I had a sick feeling in my stomach because I knew who was going to get blamed. And the 2 precincts were reporting, and they said, and it showed immediately that Prop 8 was winning, meaning that marriage was going to be defined as between a man and a woman in the state of California. And these liberal white folks were like, oh my God, well, there's only 2 precincts reporting. And I sat down in the living room and looked at all of them and I said, no, this is going to win. And here's why. And they were completely shocked. They're like, you can't be right. And in that moment, I realized I needed to be in my community. Now, for those who know, I live in San Francisco, and for those who know San Francisco, you may be familiar with the Castro. Yes, I am that stereotypical. I live in the Castro, which is the gay neighborhood, or one of them. San Francisco is supposed to be 33% gay, so I don't know how we have a gay neighborhood anymore. At any rate, it's actually the rich gay neighborhood, let's be clear. If you're a young person and you're just getting out of college, there'll be 10 of you to an apartment to get in there, right? So I go there, and of course, it's time for the celebration. I just needed to be in the Castro. I lived there. I wanted to walk the streets. And I was hoping that at least the elation would be similar. I'd remembered when Bill Clinton had been elected, and I was at the University of San Francisco, and we all went down to the Castro, and it was a big party in the streets. They closed off all the streets, and because it was the end of the Reagan-Bush era, they were playing Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead, and so I was hoping for a party like that. And instead, I was walking around, and there was some drunk folks who were hanging out there. There'd been a setup of a stage for the celebration of Obama and the speech, and clearly folks had watched the acceptance speech, but I recognized that there was a certain age group missing. Definitely anyone over 30 wasn't really around unless you lived in the neighborhood. And I felt like a ghost walking around my own neighborhood. I felt really sick. And I was wondering, do these people know what has just happened? And I felt that my elation, my ability to enjoy the election of the first black president in these incredibly racialized United States had been stolen from me. I couldn't be happy at all. And as I was walking around, I ran into one of our grad students and started explaining because I realized I was really angry at myself because I hadn't spoken up. I don't know whether I could have changed anything, but I definitely know I was pissed that I hadn't spoken up as a queer man. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the word queer, it's quite different from being a gay man. Gay for us in particularly the San Francisco Bay Area, is a particular way of being that's political, that's pretty much understood across the United States. But queerness, at least for me, interrupts the binaries of gender. And for me, the way how I see the world around these diverse genders, particularly trans people and genderqueer people, I knew that based on my attractions to masculinities, not to a sexual organ or to a particular way of being, made me queer and not gay. And gay just does not describe it. And so there I was speaking to who I knew to be another queer man and feeling sad. And this man, Kip Williams, who has organized many marches, came and he was doing his Castro on the streets and interviewed us. I made a decision in that moment that I no longer would allow myself to be silent. I knew that the next day, brown and black people in California were going to be feeling the brunt, and that what was going to happen, we were going to be blamed. Racism exists in incredible ways in the gay community as it exists everywhere else. And there I was living in the whitest gay community, and I knew that I was about to be ostracized and feel a little bit of pain. And the reality is that I felt the need sometimes in my own community for the next week, because I was being stared at as a black man, to make it really clear in whatever I was wearing that I was gay. Or I was queer, at least gay for them, queer. But I wasn't heterosexual. And for those of us who are reading the New York Times and other newspapers in California, there were people who were writing in within the next few days, blaming the black community in particular. How could they? They must know that they've suffered slavery, now they're going to take away our rights, etc. And we know that that was rubbish anyway, because the way how it worked was that it was mostly white folks who voted for Prop 8, because that's just the majority in California. So that's just a numbers game, so it was foolishness. And the second piece of that is that it was dependent on how often you went to church. So that shouldn't have been a surprise either. But yet, it was a racialized argument. So when I saw the Advocate cover and I went storming into my apartment, I wrote back and I said, the cover of issue 1021, while provocative, had the effect of sprinkling salt into a wound that I had hoped was healing. I'm a gay black male. Again, I use gay for larger audiences because it just doesn't make sense to evoke queer when you want to make another point. Black male living in San Francisco. When I saw the white words, gay is the new black, against the black background of your magazine cover, the sick feeling in my gut that rose after the passage of Prop 8, but had since begun to settle, came back. If gay is the new black, then what are black, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender folk? The new gay? It was also distressing to see words I use to describe my identity twisted into a clever play on an old fashion cliche, thus minimizing the experiences of those who are black and gay, me. Michael Gross takes great pains in his article to caution readers who might want to draw comparisons between black civil rights and gay civil rights, or who travel down the slippery slope of making direct comparisons between the oppression of black people versus gay and lesbian people. However, for all of his eloquence, he fails to illustrate the complexity of the two evils of racism and homophobia. I experience racism more frequently than homophobia, but it does not make one worse than the other. Racism is a near daily experience for me, but these manifestations of racism seldom ever carry the threat of extreme violence that can sometimes accompany homophobia. Racism and homophobia take the same toll, but the painful experience of each is like describing the difference between bleeding to death from 1,000 paper cuts versus a gunshot wound. Which would you prefer? Seeing the cover of your magazine was like receiving all those paper cuts and the gunshot wound all at once. As we continue the conversations of how we reach out to other communities, let's not forget that the work we have to do within our own community. If we are still writing articles that unintentionally disappear LGBT people of color, how do we believe we can build effective coalitions with heterosexuals, particularly those from communities of color, faith communities, and those who are economically disenfranchised? We might also want to avoid absolutes, such as the title of your cover, The Last Great Civil Rights Struggle. Really? Is it the last? I think some communities, among them transgender people, might have something to say about that. The passage of Prop 8 in California illuminated the work we must do within our community, as well as across all communities. Let us use this opportunity to enhance a more complicated and authentic dialogue across our differences. So that was my response. I knew I only had so much space. By the way, that last paragraph around asking for greater dialogue was not printed by the Advocate. They stopped at the place where I was in most pain and anger, and that's what they printed. They also, I wrote to them just because I was writing to them as a fellow activist. I had no desire, I didn't even give thought that they would print it or wanted it printed. I didn't know. I mean, it's okay they did. But many of my friends said, wow, I dare them to print it. I wonder if they will. The way I found out they printed the article was that Tom Borden, who's the LGBT director at Tufts University in Boston, called me and said, Billy, your article, your letter that you sent to the consortium of LGBT directors is in the Advocate this month. Do you know that? I went, no. And then he said, they never asked your permission. I went, nope, they never did, never called me. I've never heard from the Advocate, never at all. So kind of tells me that the Advocate, a magazine that I in some way cherished as I was coming out when I was in college in the 80s, it's, as I've become more aware as to what types of voices need to be added to the community, it still tends to disappoint me. So so having this on our cover of a magazine, I may be angry about that, but you know what? I'm really grateful that they did that. And here's why. Unintentionally, I am sure they were unintentional in this, they really highlighted a whole lot of other problems and things that we've been needing to talk about as an LGBT community and as LGBT to straight people of color and faith communities for a long time. So here are a few bullet points that I made. I pointed out recently about this actual statement. Gay is the new black, and some of you can think of many others, but here are about 6. First, it subtly engages the reader in what I call oppression Olympics. My oppression is worse than your oppression, that it places the history of black oppression in America as somehow the worst, more so than other histories of inclusion. So is the genocide visited upon a people stolen from their land worse than the genocide visited upon a people whose land was stolen? So why not gay is the new Native American? What's that all about? Why is this being placed in that way? Is this an analysis we really want? Is it a useful analysis? My answer is no. It's not a useful. These histories are too distinct and need to be addressed and honored separately. It ignores the history of LGBT communities and the uniqueness of African American struggle for civil rights. So, as many people have pointed out, it completely ignores that, I mean, black is still black. We still have a way to go. Just because Obama's been elected president, there's still 75% unemployment among black men in South Central Los Angeles. We have a problem. Racism still exists. More importantly, it's a gay and lesbian magazine. They ignored their own history. Why would you throw away your own history, and there's quite a bit of it, of gay and lesbian history, and all of a sudden say, well, we're going to attach ourselves to this other way of being that we simply haven't given any chance of, we simply haven't analyzed. It disappears other marginalized genders, races, sexual orientation under the umbrella of gay rights. Completely disappears lesbians, completely disappears bisexuals, completely disappears genderqueer folk and their needs. It makes separate from black without intersection and thus disappears black LGBT folk. It centers marriage as the most important LGBT civil right and subordinates or ignores other very pressing issues like fair housing, particularly for LGBT youth and LGBT elderly people. It is a crisis in our community. Many people outside the LGBT community, many people within, do not know about the homeless rate. It is estimated that most of the homeless youth in places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York identify as non-heterosexual or non-gender conforming. And there's a video that was made, a documentary called Out in the Cold by some folks out of Colorado some years ago, documenting this very thing. So we have our young people and our old people. We call ourselves a community, and yet here we are ignoring that. We have a few things we can learn, maybe from the black community, rather than just saying, oh, we're the new black, correct? What about immigration? Immigration rights. There are lots of folks that are needing to run, or what about just if I have a partner from another country. So you get marriage in California that does nothing for the Defense of Marriage Act that's at the federal level, and thus does not allow me to marry and bring to this country the person I may love from another country. Heterosexuals get to do that on a whim. Some of them date for a long time, but let's be real. Folks just, they get the right to say, this is the person I love, I'm gonna sign this, we got married, and they're off and running. And there are plenty binational couples who are LGBT who have to spend an exorbitant amount of money just to see one another. Job discrimination, and of course housing again. There are only 25 states where there's non-discrimination clause for gay and lesbian people. If you add transgender to that, it drops to 13 states. So in 25 states in the union, I can be fired at will for being gay. So, okay, so we're running for marriage, so I get some marriage rights. I get married and we can hang out in my house, but I can't tell nobody on my job because I'll lose my job in some states. So where's that fight? Healthcare, medical research, hate violence, just to name a few. It is a lazy statement in an attempt to explain very complex issues and histories. But like I said, I'm really happy the Advocate put it on the cover because we needed to talk. I want to show you very quickly a video clip. Oh, that worked. This little dog.
That we why do some African Americans feel that they can't see that we're just asking for rights, when for so long they asked for rights, and all of a sudden maybe it just didn't happen soon enough. Maybe we should have asked for rights back in the 60s when, you know, they were getting their rights. And if we were to ask then, they would have shown interest. They would have been like, yeah, we're getting our rights, we need to give it to somebody else. But now we've got this huge 40-year gap.
I think we need to be careful about comparing what's going on with the LGBT movement and the African American civil rights movement. I think obviously there are some similarities in that both communities are fighting for equal treatment under the law. However, I think that what African Americans had to go to throughout our history in the United States, whether it's things like Jim Crow laws or segregation, etc., is not exactly what we're going through as LGBT people here in America. And I think that when we talk about, try to conflate the two and compare them as being equivalent, it's, I think, very divisive.
There's a similarity here. I mean, it's analogous to the African American civil rights movement in particular because of the legal principles. And I think a lot of why that analogy has come up a lot in recent years is because our movement has done a lot of litigation.
A lot of them are here, but I don't know where.
One of the things I thought when I first saw the title for Is Gay the New Black was that this was intentionally written to be provocative. It was written in kind of a smart-ass kind of way. And I think it was written to get a rise out of people.
To me, a good sentiment is one that challenges people. That sentiment is not about equating our struggle with the black struggle. It is about saying it's our turn to assert ourselves in a way that is more powerful and that is more assertive. We have a black president right now. Do you think that we could have an elected out gay or lesbian president? I don't think that will be possible right now. And in that sense, gay is the new black.
Gay is the new black, I think, is a very overly simplistic and, possibly offensive to people and, in some ways rightfully so. I would never put that on a sign. I don't think it should be the slogan for our movement, but I don't think it's inappropriate to draw comparisons.
Some of what we saw out of Prop 8 was, once the proposition passed, some white gay people pointed the finger at African American voters, even though African American voters only made up 10% of the electorate in California.
No, we're not gay, but we support y'all. I mean, like, if people die, I said that wrong. If two gay people get married, and it's not gonna kill anybody, so like, let them do what they want. We're not gay, but we still support y'all. Y'all already know what it is.
All right.
DPL.
What do you have to say no on Prop 8?
I don't gotta say nothing. All I gotta say I support y'all.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, it's been almost like we've been forgotten, LGBT African American people. The African American community doesn't talk so much about black gay people, and when the leadership of the African American community think and talk to gay people, they're usually talking to white gay people. And when white gay people talk about black people, they don't necessarily include African American gay people. So we are, I think, in a unique position to help bridge the gap between both communities. But in so many ways, we are left out of the conversation. But having said that, it's also incumbent upon African American LGBT people to be more vocal, to come out and to be open and honest about who we are, and both in the African American community as well as in the LGBT community.
So I wanted to show that to you, to show that, not that I think I need this. Do I? Yeah, I do. Okay. That it is more complex, that some folks do come up and say, well, there is a need to make a comparison. So let's compare. Fine, they want us to compare. There are only a couple things that I wanted to point out in terms of the similarities and differences. When it comes to race, more often than not, the difference is that from gay is that you're born into either a family or at least a community where someone looks like you, can teach you a little bit about who you are. Maybe there's some role models for however you see them. You can look out and go, oh, I exist. Usually that's what's going on around race. That's a simple way of looking at it. It's about visibility. When you are gay or lesbian or bisexual and transgender, no such thing usually exists. Now, there are some areas where, there are some folks who I've now come across who are now at college that are growing up in lesbian and gay households, but that is not true for the vast majority of LGBT people. There's a sense of isolation. There isn't even a way to name oneself. I get tons of emails from across the country that somehow the person has found me, usually from someone who thinks they may be transgender, but you can equate this to gay as well, that folks still aren't sure what those feelings are like. So when someone is young, they know they're feeling different, but who do they talk to? And most of the time, not most of the time, but sometimes they're even growing up in hostile households. So growing up in households that they're sleeping with the enemy. They can't, if they're teased at school, they can't go home and ask mom and dad for comfort. Say, hey, people are beating me up or teasing me for being gay. So there's that difference. Whereas if someone were to tease me for being black on the playground, and I go home, there's going to be some sort of response, whether it be comfort or my mom marching up to some school to let someone know that you're not going to treat her child like that. There are examples of, in terms of the visibility and invisibility and what the impact that has. Now, for gay people, you can hide. We can hide that. But what does that do with the hiding? There's a price for that. But the reality is that it's invisible. You become a target of someone's racial agenda based on your skin color. And so there's no hiding that. And so it's easy to round you up. It's easy to target you. Now, you'll hear this time and time again as well, from people of color who may be straight and less informed, that, well, you folks can hide, without the understanding of what that means to be in the closet. Because we're not choosing to hide, it's because out of fear of being hurt or harmed or misunderstood. And so there's harm done to both communities for being targeted, whether it's invisible or visible. But those are, and we can go on and on about similarities and differences, but what are the shared things? That's what's more important. That's what brings coalitions. There's a missing and biased history told about both communities. Again, I'm talking like how the national narrative is, as if gay is over here and black is over here. So I'm going to split my identities for a minute. But I'm telling you, as a gay black man, that when I look at gay history, I see missing history, or I have to go to college to find things out. I still had students surprised about Harvey Milk, and that's recent history, okay? So and there's a bias in the history. There's a lot of misinformation and stereotypes told about both communities. So when we arrive on the scene, whether we're coming out or when we're born and go to school, there's already folks that have information about us that's completely incorrect, and there are expectations about that. There are histories of violence and exclusion. I unfortunately decided to go online and look at the Tyra Banks show on Is Gay the New Black? And I was sad I did that to myself. Because the things that were being said, for those of you who didn't see it, you just need to know the visual itself was beyond shocking. That she had the straight people in the audience put on shirts that said straight, and the gay people in the audience, of all genders, put on shirts that said gay, or maybe they said LGBT, who knows, that doesn't identify a person. And then there was this group at the front with red t-shirts with a big question mark on front, and then they entered into dialogue. And at one point, there was a black woman, a straight black woman, said, "You people haven't been lynched. You don't know what it's like to suffer from this violence." And all I could think was, where do you live? Okay, so Matthew Shepard, then there was this lad, Billy, who was in Alabama, who they beat him up, and then they put gasoline on him and burned him for being gay. There's a lot of violence against gay people. There's histories of violence in both. There's histories of exclusion. We know this. There's histories of naming, whether it be the Negro race, the Afro-American race, African-American, are you black? Of course, within the LGBT community, we joke about what's the alphabet soup? Are you lesbian, gay, bisexual? Then people think that transgender is yet another one that's separate. Are you queer? Are you genderqueer? What are you? Are you butch, femme? Are you down? Are you down low? What's that? So we have some shared histories. We also have shared histories that are really good. When I say shared histories, I'm talking about shared similar types of things happening to us. And so we need to look at how oppression has impacted all of us. They may have impacted us differently, but it doesn't mean, again, that one was worse than the other. Exclusion is exclusion is exclusion. Violence is violence is violence. And so whether it be the violence against James Byrd, who the hate crimes bill is named after, along with Matthew Shepard, of being dragged by a truck, and incidentally that happened again recently, I can't remember the state. Wow, we need to be aware that when that violence is done, it's because of difference and stepping outside of the norms. So that we need to move away from these comparisons that set us up and distract us from what the real issues are. And it's the issue of inclusion. It's the issue of economic empowerment. And I have another clip I wanted to show you from Michael Eric Dyson, who's one of my favorite lecturers and authors, where he was speaking at the Commonwealth Club recently in San Francisco.
I understand the tensions on both sides. You know, black folks say, can we have something? Can we get something that's ours? Ain't nobody appropriating all the time. They took jazz. Can we keep the civil rights thing? Everybody ain't black. Now, here's the thing that I think a lot of black people miss, is that it's real flattery for people to try to compare themselves to black people. You know, hey, we want to be black. We're down like them. It's an insult to a lot of black people like, hey, it ain't the same thing, though, dog. So slow down with that. What's interesting to me, though, is that many African-American people forget that the civil rights movement itself was borrowed, right? Then pay some royalties to Mahatma Gandhi, because that's where King got it. So I'm sure the Indian people go like, you ripping us off, man. Like that King stuff was sampled. Like you like ripping us off. Like we pay it to sing, not to bling. All right, so excuse me, sing. And I ain't mad. I mean, the point is that it's always promiscuous. You're borrowing from a culture of opposition. Gandhi, South Africa, fighting. Gandhi, turning a nation around. King being inspired by what one biographer calls that little brown saint. Going to meet with Nehru in India. And then borrowing that in application to African American culture. It's already borrowed. It ain't original. Now, what's original is what King did with it, right? Because King borrowed a whole bunch of stuff and a bunch of words. I don't want to get into that. You know, he ripped it off, he stole it. Well, the person whose dissertation he sampled said, I regret that I have but one dissertation to give to Dr. King. I wish I had more things to offer to him. Because when he finished King Eyes in it, it was cold, right? When you know, look, 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. 50 years ago, great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, well, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, yes. This momentous decree came. Now, he didn't rip that off. I'm just using that as an example. Style is important. Black people think that black people have style over substance. No, style becomes a vehicle for substance. When Michael Jordan put the ball through his leg and around his head, he's still scoring 2 points. That's still substance. He still won 6 championships, player. So what's interesting is that when it comes to appropriation, black people are sensitive because we've been rarely able to own much, and so we feel proprietary over something that's already sampled. But we don't know the intellectual origins of it. We just know the existential and the moral claims that we make. I think that gay people do black people a favor. And first of all, what are we forgetting here? Some gay people happen to be black. Duh. And it's not like they told them, oh, you're gay. You don't have to go to the back. Stay up front with us. Because you're looking awful delicious today. You go to the head of the bus. I don't make the news. I'm just reporting it right here. Oh, no. They ain't got no exemption. James Baldwin spoke for black people as a black gay man. Barbara Smith now, Audre Lorde. Without Bayard Rustin, straight black people would never enjoy the rights they enjoy now. Adam Clayton Powell called Martin Luther King Jr. up and said, I'm going to tell a lie that you and Bayard Rustin are having an affair if you don't put him out, not because he's gay, but because he was opposing that black gay man, Lyndon Baines Johnson, before King was, and more bravely than Adam Clayton Powell. If that's gay, dig it. So I'm saying you some of the bravery, some of the courage, but some of the black people are gay and some of the gay people are black, or Latino, Gaytino, Afro-American, I don't know, something. Asian brothers and sisters, gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual. So the point is, y'all, that to appropriate the black experience is apropos because the black experience itself appropriated other models, paradigms, and instances of resistance. How I came to my own look, because of my homophobia, majorly. I'm born in a homophobic culture, taught to be suspicious and critical. I'm a Baptist preacher. What do you think? I remember I was a young preacher, 22, 23 years old. One of my great singers in my choir, I was pastoring his church for a year. He came to me, somebody told a lie that he was gay, but then he found out he was, because then somebody heard the lie and then they got together, and I'm like, wow, what am I gonna do? Started thinking about it, I was like, dang, the dude can sing. Putting him out to church is not an option. Because them whack-ass heterosexuals cannot blow. I ain't seen no gay money turned down in the black church. We don't take gay money here. I ain't never seen it. The only funny money they don't want is change. So it's been a struggle. I struggle against my homophobia now, right? Defend gay people, I don't want to see it, right? I don't want to see that perform. People say, I don't want you to put it in my face. Well, you know, heterosexism is like whiteness. It's dominant, therefore it's rendered invisible. So we don't even pay attention to the codes that are enculturated in us, that are deeply inscribed in our subconscious, that we take for granted as the myth of the given. That's what we start with. So gay and lesbian and transgender bisexual people are against that. And look, I pick at people in my family, you got people in your family, they're human beings. Are you telling me God just gonna send them to hell for how they have sex? I mean, and people tell me, well, there are black people, there are books out there, Heather has 2 moms. I said, true, but, you know, I guess they could write a book, Shaniqua got 4 baby daddies. And I love Shaniqua. You saw how I defended him against Bill Cosby. You know how I'm rolling. But I'm saying, let's be real about it. Did you see the report, was it today, Professor, that 40% of babies born out of, I mean, is it higher than that? Born out of wedlock? Now, here, it's higher, but here's the difference now. It ain't just Shaniqua. So now it's Angelina Jolie. Oh, so it's cool, it's Maud. Madonna can go, I'm getting divorced, but I got a child. So it's cool now, but they demonize black and Latino women. Here we are bearing the bodies. That's why I can't forgive Justin Timberlake. Let's see, say something. That nipple of, that renegade nipple of Janet Jackson's. That get ripped from its sheath, right? I knew the black nipple was powerful, I just didn't know the rest of America knew it. The aura and aureola. It's an amazing thing. So the point is, how then do we not speak? The reason black folk don't want to deal with homosexuality, because we can barely deal with heterosexuality, because America has shamed us. Mm-hmm.
And so the next part that I want to bring up for you, so Michael is addressing the piece, so are blacks more homophobic? Something that comes up all too often in a lot of circles. And it's impossible to address that question without first addressing, so where's the racism in the LGBT community? And I will show you where it showed up in an ad for Prop 8. The narrator of this particular ad is Samuel L. Jackson. This was supposed to be the answer to a question that I'd had. How are you going to speak to us?
It wasn't that long ago that discrimination was legal in California. Japanese Americans were confined in internment camps. Armenians couldn't buy a house in the Central Valley. Latinos and African Americans were told who they could and could not marry. It was a sorry time in our history. Today, the sponsors of Prop 8 want to eliminate fundamental rights. We have an obligation to pass along to our children a more tolerant, more decent society. Vote no on Prop 8. It's unfair and it's wrong.
Okay. Can I just have, if you can shout loud enough, someone to raise their hand and tell me what you saw wrong?
Yeah, you got the black guy speaking, but where's the actual black couples there? Like, there's no familiarity, really no familiarity there at all.
Not at all. None. What else did you see?
Really, can you repeat those questions, answers?
Oh, you really can't hear that.
Pretty much there was no visibility whatsoever of a black homosexual couple at all in any of the scenes.
No, all the historical figures were around people of color, and then we're talking about the gays now, and they were all white.
Yeah, I was just saying, what if you didn't recognize the voice, that it was Samuel L. Jackson?
Exactly. As soon as I told you it was Samuel L. Jackson, I went, oh, I should have had you try and recognize the voice. Because you can recognize black voices, right? But I mean, Samuel L. Jackson's, for the most part, like Morgan Freeman and a few others, you kind of know. But it does make an assumption. There was another one that was really subtle historically there. They addressed interracial marriage in a clip as it rolled right by. Did anyone see or recognize that clip? It was a couple. Hold on, where are you?
I believe that was Loving, wasn't it? Loving and got it.
That was the Lovings, Mildred and her husband. But what I know they failed to realize is that in all of my time of studying civil rights, I came from another country, and so therefore I have to absorb and learn a lot about the civil rights movement in books and talking to my classmates, etc. No time. Now, interracial marriage did come up in the conversation, but never, ever, ever, ever did it come up as the number one thing. It wasn't the first thing I heard about that folks were fighting for. I'm not saying it was an important one, but it was never the first one. And then, I never knew what the Lovings looked like for a long time. So there was an assumption that anyone watching that, particularly African Americans who it was targeted toward, would, one, recognize the Lovings, two, have an emotional response and say, oh, they're just like us. Look, that's the same thing. There was an elitist assumption made in that, a racist assumption made in the ad, and yet it was made by gay and lesbian people, some of whom were black. I was incredibly disappointed, to say the very least. So, but this doesn't let black people off the hook, does it? Michael Eric Dyson did bring it up, that in order for us to move forward, we must address racism within all communities, and we must address homophobia and how it exists and why it exists within communities of color. In particular, for the African American community, at a 13% seroconversion, that's HIV negative to HIV positive rate among African American men. That is incredibly high. And the highest rate of other infections are happening, and this just came out about a year or two ago, among women of color, particularly women of African descent. So it isn't about how we blame, it's like how do we have, as he said, conversations about sexuality. It isn't just about homosexuality, this is about sexuality and the shame around that. People are literally dying, and yet we're being distracted around who can get married and what they're doing in their bedroom. And yet within our own community, black people, folks are dying. And gay people, I'm still experiencing racism. White gay people need to talk to one another. We need to have to stop just saying we need an anti-racist agenda. We need to start doing that and have authentic conversations about our shame, our guilt, and our fear. In particular, addressing what's going on with the black church. There's need for folks to understand the histories of black churches. This is not just about religion. This is not just about religion. It is about community organizing. There are histories there. When I got in last night, I'm 3 hours difference from you, so I wasn't ready to go to sleep even though it was midnight. So I turned on the television, and as the universe would have it, there was Henry Louis Gates Jr. and his documentary about hidden lives, etc. And of course I loved that, and I watched it again and was reminded about the history of the black church, particularly in the South, about community organizing, and in particular about a community in Georgia that had resisted the migration north. And the way that it happened was that folks like the great-grandfather of, I can't remember the name of the comedian, I'll get back to him, had sold off pieces of property to his congregation so that they could stay, so black people could own property. But that was an organizing principle. So religion is in there, but it's about how communities survive the tyranny and the oppression of racism that's visited upon them. And so we can't just assume that when we're talking about homophobia, which is going to be mixed into Christianity, that within the black church, this is just oh, well, you've been oppressed, so you understand our oppression, and this church needs to understand that their religion needs to go away. This is about organizing of peoples and how we survived as a people. By the way, that wasn't just in the United States. That was true in the Bahamas, where I grew up as well, which was also a slave culture. And so I grew up in a family where there were quite a few ministers, and I actually have a great-grandfather that started his own church as well. I'm well aware of what that means. When I went to church, for me, as a young boy, it wasn't just about whether we were going to worship God or something. I was going to see my cousins. It was a family reunion every Sunday. And every one of those old women had the right to spank me. It was a problem. I was a problem, what can I say? So, how do we get to the point of inclusion? How do we have these conversations? We need to know about our shared experiences around privilege. And so I'm just going to have two people participate for me here. Can I have two volunteers? There we go. You'll get the easy one. So, could you just read this out loud for me, just in the black type, not below it?
Sure. Representations of my family structure, romantic relationships, and general daily experiences are widely represented in films, books, and on television.
Thank you. What was your name?
Amy.
Amy, thank you, Amy. So for the rest of you, that was a statement of privilege, that somebody has that social privilege, that representations of their family structure is widely represented, okay, in books, television, etc. Now, since we're here talking about gay, lesbian issues, I can tell you that that's not a privilege for gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual people. I have to go to the gay and lesbian section to find the books. I have to turn to Logo or maybe find the movie, etc. So I can see positive representations or sometimes any representation of my experience. But who else is that true for? Who else doesn't have that experience? Who else has to go to the section of the bookstore? Who else?
African Americans.
African Americans. Who else? Anyone that's not white for you. Who else? What other structures? Anyone that's not American. Anyone that doesn't speak English. Non-Christians. Who else? Disabled people. Single parent homes. Single people. So, for many of us, we're experiencing that pain. And it's not a pain that's every day that we think, oh my God, yet again, there are no representations. But we're aware, and sometimes it rises to the surface. So the exact same feeling of me needing to sometimes find a movie that connects with my experience, whether it be gay or black, is the same as someone who has those identities separate. Okay? So understanding that that emotional response is true for all of us takes us a little step closer to, oh, you feel that too? So we don't get into the oppression Olympics of mine is worse than yours. Who wants to read this second one?
I don't have to worry that my parents might disown me, throw me out, or not pay for my education if he, she, they knew who I was friends with or with whom I was in love. Elise.
Thank you, Elise. Anyone want to say, okay, so we know for gay and lesbian people, again, I'm taking the easy answer, is that gay and lesbian folks, since we're talking about love here, not identity, or if you're bisexual, if you're in a same-sex relationship and here you are at college, your parents, and you're not out, your parents may have already threatened that they won't pay for your college or throw you out of the house or something like that. So that happens to us. Who else could that happen to?
Non-Christians again.
Non-Christians, explain a little bit more.
Well, if you were growing up in like a very religious Christian household and then you renounce that faith, you could easily be threatened with not having your education paid for.
So if you started dating someone outside of that faith?
Or even if you started dating someone outside that faith. Yeah.
So, non-Christian. So if you do interfaith dating for some folks, anyone else? Yes. Interracial relationships. That's still happening as well. I saw another hand. That's what you're going to say, interracial?
I guess something I deal with politics, and I guess the Democrat and Republican, if you vote different.
That could well happen as well. So if you come from a household where that's just not acceptable. And I saw one more hand before we move on. Yes. And binational relationships. Don't date outside of. Okay. And different socioeconomic status. Date within your pool. So we have all of this pain that some of us go through. We have these shared experiences. It is the intersection of those privileges or lack of privileges. It is the knowledge that we have these emotional responses around exclusion or how we were treated. It is not about the content or how it visits us, it's that it does. Oppression is very simple in its insidious nature of marginalizing each and every one of us into our communities, balkanizing us, and then blaming each other for that pain, without actually addressing the very systems of oppression that hold us all back. And so we end up in, is gay the new black? And we end up in saying that, well, all those black people who, as if somehow civil rights have been completely realized for people of color, and particularly African Americans, that somehow gay and lesbian civil rights are being held back because of that. And so here on our campus and on other campuses, there are things we must do. We need to engage in critical dialogues in intentional ways, that the faculty and staff should set those up, that you choose a topic, and it's being done at many other colleges. University of California, Berkeley is trying such a thing as well next semester, so that folks can speak across difference in brave ways. We must respect the space of in-groups, so allies know when it is right to be in a room and when it's time to step back. And for those of us within our in-group dialogues, be really clear that this is for our group right now. We need to talk about our own dirty laundry, our own stuff that you won't understand, and I don't have time to explain to you or try and break down the language. And we must make time for the intergroup talk. So we must be clear about that. We must engage in collaborative projects. In particular, higher education program directors must be in constant communication to create appropriate programs and services that meet the needs of multiple intersections while recognizing the need for in-group space initiatives, programs, and responses. And I think I've seen that happening here. So we have to understand cultural competence, but more importantly, have some cultural humility. What we mean by cultural humility is that we all engage in this lifelong process of self-reflection and self-critique. That I know that there's a whole lot that I don't know about a whole lot of other people, and I'm willing to ask some questions, and more importantly, I'm willing to make a mistake. And for those who experience an ally making a mistake, yes, call them out on it, but more importantly, forgive them so we can all move on. We need to engage in more collaborative public service projects and internships so we can start learning from another while doing things together. It doesn't mean that we all have to go and help the poor in a literacy program and do that sort of thing. It could be anything, and to be really intentional about that. Institutions need to support curricula and research that illuminate the diverse histories and experiences. LGBT, disability, ethnic studies, and it goes on. Institutions need to create teaching tools for all faculty and teaching staff, including graduate instructors, that promote inclusive classroom learning and cultural sensitivity, competence, and humility across disciplines. So it's not enough to just shove diversity or those types of programs into the social sciences. This happens in the STEM issues as well. In science, technology, engineering, and math, we need to have diversity tools as well, so that we're teaching across differences and so that students are encouraged to work together on projects that, even if they're solving problem sets in engineering. Institutions need to encourage student entrepreneurship and leadership in research, teaching, and activities that support the mission of equity and inclusion. And that way, the students, the younger ones, can highlight some of the emerging communities that some of us don't know about. If we're being caught out by language, that means there are things that are happening that we don't know about. Now, of course, it needs to be a little bit more structured, but we need to create spaces where that can happen. And lastly, by doing this, what we do is we assist the greater movements, so that as we're graduating more students, as we're having them engage in these diverse leadership experiences, in this diverse curricula, we're placing them in graduate schools, in corporate America, in nonprofits, where they have some cultural competence and humility. And so that the folks who are making the commercials with Samuel L. Jackson don't make that mistake, that someone would have said, that just doesn't look right. And that those commercials would have shown up right away instead of at the very end. That commercial did not air until late October. The election was the beginning of November, as you remember. November 5th, was it? Something like that. So there's lots of work to be done. And there's lots of dialogue. We have about 35 minutes left. And so I want to engage each of us in a dialogue, some questions, answers. What are your thoughts? Yes?
There was a recent edition of The Advocate that was titled something along the lines of Obama, Our Biggest Nope. I was just curious how you thought racism within the gay community attributed to that magazine article or title, as well as how homophobia within the American community attributed to.
Well, I saw the Nope, again, The Advocate. Yay, I saw them do it again. But what it's triggered is more conversations. It's again not having any political acumen to know that how is Obama moving forward on particular on his campaigning promises. But more importantly, it felt like, at least to me as a black man, the critique that's been coming from the gay community has felt a little bit, I felt the sting of it, it felt a little bit, it's felt disrespectful. And I wondered if it would look like that. I do not remember, but it's hard for me to really compare because we didn't have the same way of really speaking to another. The internet wasn't where it is now. We didn't have YouTube, et cetera. But I remember Bill Clinton engaging Congress around what became Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we were behind him the whole time. And even when he came up with that horrible policy, there was not the same sting of critique. And so is racism playing out with that Advocate cover? I believe it is. At least that's how I'm experiencing. So the impact of it, again, but of course, I was already personally dismissing the Advocate, saying, well, they did that. To me, the Nope against him instead of hope was just another extension of that. But to be fair, I'm still disappointed in the president. I just didn't like the way the Advocate expressed it. Repeat the question. Oh, he asked about was the Advocate, the Advocate had a cover again that had the Obama campaign slogan that used to say hope, and it was a blue and red ad, and it said nope on the bottom, and how did I feel and how did racism play out in that. Other questions or comments? Yes.
I'm still looking for somebody to blame for Prop 8. I'm still looking for someone to blame for Prop 8 passing in California. And I guess I'd like to know what the numbers were in California for the black vote in California, because majority of whites did not vote for Obama nationwide. And overwhelmingly, people of color voted for Obama, and that seemed to make the difference.
California is a blue state, so overwhelmingly we voted for Obama. There were some counties that didn't, but very few. When it came down to Prop 8, it broke down in some really interesting ways. And even Los Angeles County, which is overwhelmingly Democratic, voted yes on Prop 8. The numbers, yes, proportionally, there was still a large majority, but within the proportion per capita of black folks who voted yes. But what we don't know is how that really played out. The issue was that when we look at that in terms of looking to blame, I've tried to move away from blaming. I even wanted to blame the Mormons. In fact, I was so furious at the Mormons. And it was very hard, but that meant what I was trying to do was just transfer the anger that really needs to be transmitted into action around what is really going on for our communities. And so, yeah, it looked like that. Yeah, there were a lot of poor people who did as well. There were a lot of white people who did as well. There were a lot of Chicanos and Latinos who voted yes. What I would say that where the pain really happened was among people of color. The students at UC Berkeley, we had a few forums afterward, and the way our students were feeling was what it was like to go home and see a yes on 8 campaign lawn sign or window sign in their houses. So it becomes really hard and really ineffective to place blame, because what we were doing was that we were selling racism yet again in our ads. We weren't speaking to groups. And so were people of color, particularly Chicano, Latino, and African American, were they voting yes because they hate gay people? Were they voting yes because they were misinformed? Were they voting yes because no one's spoken to them? Which one was it? So if you place the blame, then you need to go deeper and find out, well, why did that happen? So it makes it really difficult. So I had to personally let go of the blame. I had so much anger. I can't remember a time when I was that angry. But my focus was on Mormons, and I had to even let that go.
Well, I'm guessing that a better way to frame the question then is how to not have another Prop 8, right? Like, how do we avoid another situation where either A, people's civil rights come up to a vote by the majority, which is generally dangerous, and how do we not have some sort of loss of sort of rights in that way, which one of the things you're pointing to, it sounds like, is don't assume that people are going to vote in your favor just because they've been oppressed, right? That vote for oppressed people because they've been oppressed, right?
What Prop 8 did was it asked us to do our homework, to finally do the work that we've been needing to do in progressive communities, in the Democratic National Committee. How we avoid another Prop 8, I don't know if we can avoid that right now. We haven't done our work. We simply haven't reached across with faith communities. We simply haven't engaged in critical and really difficult dialogues. And so we're going to be playing a numbers game, or we'll be doing the numbers game of where folks are waiting for folks to die off, because it is clear that under 35 that it will pass. But that places people like my mother and aunts and all that in the group, like, so we're waiting for them to die. That's That's unacceptable to me. The way how we avoid is that we need to engage in critical discourse. What Prop 8 has asked us to do nationally is to have cross-racial dialogue, interfaith discourse, and to truly try and understand each other's differences. It's also called us, truly, to look at how come marriage rights equals civil rights. Why is holy matrimony, so for the Catholics, a sacrament, and also tied to my taxes and how I get property and how things are exchanged and who gets to visit me in the hospital? Those things should not be tied together. So where I am personally is that I need the French model, that the conversation, how do we avoid another Prop 8? By not going after marriage in the same way that we go for it, but by really deconstructing and analyzing this system of couplehood and coupling legal rights that should be for all citizens with a way of structuring how we are in relationship. I feel the same way around healthcare. Why is it that my mother can't have my health benefits? That she has to either be living in my household or some other configuration, or it has to be my wife or my kids, etc. Why is it that we as communities aren't taking care of everyone? Why does it have to be structured around a marriage and who lives in the household? I can prove kinship. I can prove that's my mom. I can prove that she should be able to have that. So marriage calls us to have, this marriage fight calls us to have a greater and broader conversation around civil rights and who gets included.
Because we're kind of socialized to divide ourselves, I think that whether I agree with the cover of The Advocate is not important. It was kind of done, I think, to just start some controversy. So I'm wondering now if you believe that because part of the big issue is that maybe it's not about us racing to the bottom of who is more oppressed or not, but maybe just that Black people or people of color hadn't realized some of the pain and violence and anger that had been against or that has occurred against GLBT people. So do you think that now these conversations, they'll be able to kind of pick up on some of the parallels and maybe there won't be so much perceived Black homophobia?
I think within a certain class strata that's going to happen. So if we're talking, if one has the privilege of being able to have this type of conversation, this is a privileged conversation. We get to sit here and deconstruct and talk about that. If I go to the Tenderloin in San Francisco, if I go to Bayview Hunters Point, if I go to South Central, if I go to East LA, places where people of all colors are economically disenfranchised, this isn't a conversation. So how they're going to vote based on that pain, it's not going to be a conversation like this. It's going to be about work alongside. So where is it that a friend of mine started what's called Rainbow World Fund, but he takes his program into countries in Central America. And so he's doing like the Gay Peace Corps. He'd hate me for saying it that way, but it's kind of like that. But I'm like, wait a minute, why aren't we as gay people starting nonprofits that are not just serving gay people, but working on economic injustice? And so that we're speaking, and so that folks who are in other strata, we're having work alongside, and you get to know me based on not the fact that I'm helping you, but I'm working alongside you, and I'm an openly gay man. Harvey Milk actually taught us this one. And it's about coming out, but it's not just about, okay, I'm out, I'm gay, you need to accept me for who I am. No, some people need to know a little bit more than that. They need to know your story, they need to know how you fit into this community, how are you advancing community? And so we can't just run to our enclaves, we can't play this safe anymore. Others.
I like what you said about how we join each other as community. But again, we can't use each other to pit each other against each other. And I think we do need to call it and name things that happen. And like you said, the title was a racist title. They made black gays invisible again, and that's why you were furious and outraged. They made people invisible. And I guess I'm against, I know one time at Grand Valley, they were talking about tolerance, and they used the N-word to talk about we don't use intolerance here. To me, you don't use that type of dialogue to promote another issue or of oppression.
Thank you very much. Other thoughts or comments?
How can we approach issues of racism and homophobia with people who are racist or homophobic?
Oh, that's $1 million question, right? Well, the first thing within that is, how are we naming and how are we knowing that someone is racist or homophobic? So for us, we have to understand how we're naming that. The second one is, what is the movable, what is it we're assuming about their homophobia or their racism, and what is the dialogue that we need to enter in? So I don't enter into conversation with someone who I may perceive to be homophobic or possibly, well, even racist. Sometimes there's a lot of liberals that don't think they're racist and say a whole lot of foolish things. I start consciously questioning their thoughts and actions and asking a lot of questions without the desire to actually move them. I just want to hear their story and perhaps they'll hear mine. I believe that every single time we do this, this isn't about, oh, okay, every single one of us agrees, now you're less homophobic, now you're less racist, now let's go out of here. We've planted a seed. We'll start engaging in dialogue. So if you've met up with someone that you believe to be homophobic, the most important thing to do is to not beat them down for being homophobic, but to engage in dialogue for the purpose of you learning about them, not about you teaching about why they're homophobic. That's my belief system.
Thank you for walking all the way back here. Sorry about that. Shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned the increase in sexually transmitted infections amongst the African American population, primarily, or as well as just the color people that are not white. And what are your thoughts on the inability or the fact that Red Cross and other blood drives don't take blood if someone identifies as, I can't even remember the word they use, but someone who's had sex with a male who's had sex with another male. Since 1972, yeah.
Don't forget that part of the policy, because it makes so much sense. So if you have had sex with a man, and you're the same gender as far back as 1972, don't donate blood. I heard two questions in there. What do I think of, it's not the Red Cross's policy. The Red Cross has moved on from that. It's now the Food and Drug Administration that we need to move on that. It does incredible harm to the blood bank. It's a homophobic policy, and it isn't just blood, it's sperm donation as well. But I also heard you start to at least refer to when I was talking about the seroconversion rate, HIV negative to positive, among African American men at being 13%. May I ask how you were coupling those together?
The question I really wanted to ask was more just for my own knowledge